one branch of my family that was involved in engineering and developing machine tools in the early part of the century, one of my uncles. So I had an interest there. But once I got to college, I started veering more to medicine and became a pre-med. Finally went to medical school. In those days, there was the doctor draft and the Berry plan, ROTC. I was caught in my 3 ways, and I had to put in my 2 years service. I had postponed the Army requirement until after I finished not only residency, but 2 years of postdoc. I was about 30 when they finally caught up with me. I was trying to switch out of the Army into the public health service and go to NIH. And when they heard I had experience in psychopharmacology research, and particularly with LSD, they said, "Oh, we want this guy." They sent me directly to Edgewood Arsenal, the Army Chemical Center, to work on incapacitating agents that might be used in warfare, or that was their idea at the time. They had the incapacitating agents program, and that included very high potency anti-muscarinic compounds. They also had the LSD program because of its high potency and confused the enemy troops. I got an NIMH Career Development Award in 1965. I came out of the Army. So I came back to Yale. The purpose of the Career Development Award was to learn certain basic sciences. Actually started in electron microscopy and histochemistry. In 2 or 3 years, I drifted into electrophysiology. The person who was probably the biggest influence was the late Daniel X. Friedman. He was my thesis advisor when I was a medical student, late 1950s. He was a young faculty member in a department that was predominantly psychoanalytically oriented. It was very important for someone starting out in the field to have encouragement in the context of psychiatry, because that was not the accepted way at that time in the late 1950s, early 1960s. I was told at the time there would be no future for someone like me in academic psychiatry without getting credentials and analytic training, and not just analyze, but going through a training institute. I did my medical school thesis on LSD, and people today wouldn't believe that LSD was not a controlled substance at that time. So Dan left the supply of LSD with me when I was between my junior and senior year, where I did a research project. It was a behavioral study on LSD, and he left for a sabbatical at NIH, and he just left these, piles of ampules of LSD, with, I had no credentials at the time. Jarman had just come back from a sabbatical in Gatham's laboratory in England. Gatham was one of the co-proponents of the serotonin hypothesis of LSD. By 1953, it was known to be present in the brain. Nick Jarman thought of it as a neurohumoral substance. That term was used. So a substance that was present in the brain, but there was no specific knowledge that it was actually within a specific set of neurons and might be a transmitter used by those neurons. That wasn't really known until 1965. Friedman was finding in those days that LSD affected the levels of serotonin and the serotonin metabolite. When I got back from the Army and started as an assistant professor in the department, that's when the discoveries of the Swedish histochemists were being published for the first time, showing that serotonin was in a specific set of neurons in the brain, the RAF-A neurons in the brainstem, from the cells of origin, fibers containing serotonin projected to all other parts of the brain, and that serotonin was being released. This information came a little later. Like one of my first studies involved showing that evidence that when when electrically stimulated the raphe neurons in the brainstem, one can show an increase in serotonin metabolites in other parts of the brain. That's when I switched to doing electrophysiology, because I thought, well, the activity of these neurons might be very important in determining what their function was. I had no background in electrophysiology. In a neighboring lab, I got a postdoc, John Flynn, who is at Yale. We got him interested in starting some studies of this nature, which we did at night, because we didn't tell John Flynn that we were doing these. The hypothesis was that, based on Danny Friedman's findings, that LSD raised the levels of serotonin but decreased its metabolites. I hypothesized that it might be inhibiting the firing of serotonergic neurons. The transmitter would build up and the metabolites would go down, so it wasn't being released. 9 out of 10 or 95 out of 100 of my hypotheses do not pan out, but that one did. So I became a confirmed electrophysiologist from that time.